The Acid Left is a project run by cultural theorist and curator Mike Watson and artist Adam Ray Adkins at the intersection of politics and aesthetics, centering the power of the creative spirit and the need for people to take an active role in determining how production is organized. We welcome you to turn on, tune in, and shape a future collective reality.
Hey there, hi, welcome to The Acid Left. I'm Mike Watson. I'm just here today to talk fairly kind of off the cuff about Richard Dawkins and his recent comments on Kafka's Metamorphosis. So basically, Dawkins has slated this classic of short fiction, which you probably all know, in which Franz Kafka writes about this figure, Gregor Samsa, a kind of a hapless office worker who wakes up and finds himself metamorphosed into an insect, or the writing suggests a kind of large bug, although it doesn't kind of make that entirely clear. That's what's generally agreed. So Dawkins says, here it is here, the tweet, Kafka's Metamorphosis is called a major work of literature. Why? If it's science fiction, it's bad science fiction. If, like Animal Farm, it's an allegory of what? Scholarly answers range from pretentious Freudian to far-fetched feminist. I don't get it. Where are the emperor's clothes? So I think the key sentence here is I don't get it, and it's typical of Richard Dawkins to not get something and then just say that it's completely invalid, which he did for the entirety of the world religions and spirituality as such. And that's an interesting story, actually, because Dawkins tested as incapable of having spiritual experience before he went into a test lab and had this magnetic helmet attached to him by a scientist called Michael Persinger. And this helmet is actually called the God helmet because what it does is it stimulates the frontal lobe of one's brain, and it basically stimulates spiritual experience, whether real or not. So Persinger says this is no proof of spiritual experience, but is proof of how spiritual experience is generated. But Dawkins, upon putting the helmet on, had no spiritual feelings, whereas people normally get some feelings of like a presence in the room or closest to God, or some kind of positive spiritual buzz or feeling of doom or something. But it stimulates that kind of capacity in the human brain, but Dawkins felt nothing. So what Persinger said is that Dawkins actually, prior to that, had taken the test everyone takes, handwritten test, which kind of, I think it's multiple choice or something. I mentioned it's multiple choice, and it kind of indicates to what level a test subject is probably capable of spiritual experience, to what extent they're open to spiritual experience. And Dawkins tested as unable to have spiritual experience. So the part of his brain that would be responsible for this kind of thing, which is the part responsible also for creativity and sudden illuminations, isn't really there. Dawkins just doesn't get some stuff. He's good at science. He actually is responsible for the term meme. In his 70s book, The Selfish Gene, when he wrote about genetics, he came up with the word meme to rhyme with gene, to mean like a language gene, a thing, or an idea or phrase or image that spreads through the human consciousness, and through human culture. So, that's kind of cool. He came up with the word meme, but he otherwise seems kind of a dunce. But okay, so Metamorphosis, why is it maybe not such a bad thing? I'm going to quickly show you a meme. So this is one I made for The Acid Left Instagram, at The Acid Left on Instagram. And basically it's Dawkins in bed, and he's saying, this is sci-fi, it's bad sci-fi. So it's like, well, okay, it could be bad sci-fi, but you may as well be saying that having been turned into an insect. You want us to get behind the story to some degree. It's no good just saying it doesn't work for me. Either you've been taken in by the story or not. If you haven't, doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad story. But beyond that, Theodore Adorno, one of my favorite scholars, wrote about Kafka throughout his career, and actually wrote about it in Aesthetic Theory, the book I have here. The book Adorno wrote was writing as he died. That was unfinished when he died in 1969. He died out walking with his, I think, with his partner or his wife Gretel, and I think other people were there. But anyway, he didn't finish this book, but it's been collated and kind of put together into a form which can be kind of more or less understood. But it's fairly abstract as a book anyway. It's very much like in keeping with Adorno's and Benjamin's fragment method. So they basically use fragments of philosophy, and by that they kind of feel that they get somewhere closer to fragmented reality. So it kind of jumps from subject to subject, but then comes back, kind of constantly circles back on itself. So there is a logic there, but you have to kind of bear with it. But then you have to also imagine this isn't finished, so we don't know to what extent it basically, it maybe jumps around because it's not finished. That can't really be known. But it's a very, it has a lot of really interesting sections and parts, and is worth persisting with. So basically, Adorno says that that Kafka in Metamorphosis and the Penal Colony, he also mentions, effectively kind of refuses art as kind of something which can placate us, something which is neutral, something which is uninterested or disinterested, in, to use Kantian terminology. So Kant says that beauty as such is disinterested. It doesn't have a purpose. So something is beautiful because it doesn't offer you something in particular. Like you could say your telephone, your smartphone is useful, or you like eating a certain food, but this is like an interest you have in that object. But the thing about beauty, natural beauty, is it has no interest, and art tries to emulate that. So, or for Kant it does, and the good artists are those that have this kind of genius type capacity to channel nature and nature's capacity to kind of enchant us without actually offering something in particular. So if we're looking at a mountainscape, we kind of get lost in that mountainscape because we don't really know what we're looking at. It doesn't offer us anything in particular. It's too big maybe for us to say, I like that bit, I like that bit, I want to use it for this or that. So what Adorno says is that Kant takes us away from that. No, sorry, not Kant, sorry, that's Kant. That Kafka takes us away from that. And that Kafka basically does this by disturbing us. So the story of Metamorphosis is where Gregor Samsa wakes up and basically he finds himself to be some kind of, he's very transformed to some kind of hideous thing. He doesn't really know what he is, but he realizes he can't get out of bed. He has like 6 legs, and he has this kind of shell-like body, and I don't remember the exact details. And again, it's not exactly clear his form. It's kind of alluded to, like people do in fiction. But he basically, he can't get out of bed. He can't turn. He can't go to work. So his first process is, he's been turned into this kind of hideous insect thing, is that I can't go to work. And this all starts running through his mind. And then his parents at some point say that his boss has come, and his boss starts knocking on the door, saying, you have to come to work, this is disgraceful, and so on. And what's really striking is that in this kind of moment when he's transformed, and it's kind of like a heroic transformation of Greek myth, everything is entirely banal and about work, because he's living in the 20th century, okay? And everything is about profit, basically. So I think this is really what this is about. And for Dawkins to miss that is pretty limited in terms of his thinking. But also, Adorno talks about dissonance. So dissonance in music is when you have 2 notes that are normally a semitone apart or less, and they clash with each other. So if you play these 2 notes together on a piano or guitar, the vibration between the notes is such, because the notes are so close together, that you get this kind of jarring effect, and you can actually feel it if you're close to a speaker or an instrument that is playing these notes semitone apart. So dissonance in art and in culture is like something that kind of jars you in that way. And I think what Adorno is saying in aesthetic theory is that the reality of Kafka's Metamorphosis, the banality where it's just him and his house, his family are getting fed up with him after his boss goes. They start to worry about how can we pay the bills now that he's not earning, because he was the main earner in the house. His mum tries to feed him milk and bread because that was his favorite. Milk was his favorite, as a human. His sister realizes that he'd rather eat rotting meat scraps. They start to arrange the furniture to accommodate him as a kind of insect. This kind of stuff that might just happen if someone was sick or something. So you get this banality. What that is, I think, is a dissonance between something that's removed from reality, Samsa becoming a kind of beast, and reality itself. So what you read in the book is something that's quite close to reality. So what you're reading is he doesn't want to go to work. You can relate to that. His family start to reject him because he's changed. You can relate to that. But there's this very slightly different aspect, and that's what jars with the reader, because it's so real yet unreal that it could happen to us. So this is Adorno's Dissonance, how Adorno looks at dissonance. And he's basically saying that this is how art is useful now. It's no longer useful. The art that placates, the art that's beautiful, that for Kant, because it's beautiful, because it has no use value, can appeal to everybody at the same time, is universal. So later on, Adorno says that the unreality of the book as well is universal, because it's something that's unreal. Everyone can relate to it because it hasn't happened to anybody, rather than somebody saying, oh, that's happened to me. It's something that hasn't happened to anyone. So then it becomes kind of universal, that we can all imagine it equally, because none of us have a closer position to the reality of the book, of turning into this large kind of insect beast. So but then there's aspect also that we can relate to it. So again, that's where the dissonance comes in. So this is basically why this is an important book. And I suppose for Adorno, it's how art might be of value to us socially now. And another word he would use is abstraction when he talks about art, that this thing is abstract because it's like reality, but it's removed from reality. So it's abstracted from reality. It's basically what abstraction means. So that for Adorno is useful, because it's very hard to change reality with very straight statements like, we must overturn capitalism, because that kind of goes back into the cycle of language, of discourses that are part of the academic and wider system, or just part of the the capitalist system of which we live in. So anything that is relatable, that directly references reality, just enters back into the reality which is entirely capitalist. So talking about capitalism being something one cannot surmount. One thinks of Mark Fisher's "There is no alternative." He talks about in Capitalist Realism, or the term Capitalist Realism, the idea that capitalism, that the reality is entirely capitalist. So Adorno is already talking about this back in the 40s to 60s, and really Fisher kind of gets this from people like Adorno. He was very big on the Frankfurt School. So this abstraction allows one to circumvent reality and maybe talk about things in ways that can't be easily re-assimilated into capitalist reality, into capitalist realism. So this is where maybe Dawkins, I don't know his politics, one would imagine he's a liberal or some kind, at least centrist. This is where Dawkins, can't really maybe, get what's happening, where Dawkins maybe can only relate to reality, partly because he's a scientist, but also, one could say this is a symptom of capitalist realism. He's not really getting the abstraction, but the abstraction is designed to kind of jar people and give people a language outside capitalism. But more, the point is that one cannot seize upon and identify an abstract artwork and say it's this or that, and therefore bring it back into the realm of language and symbols, which are all kind of part of the capitalist whole. And one kind of sees Dawkins struggling a bit with his limited view, because Dawkins is a scientist, and scientists do what Adorno says is a good thing, but also problematic. They tend to identify things, natural things, people, situations. So the whole thing of the scientist is to identify, categorize, say, X equals Y, and give things names. Adorno says this is necessary as part of enlightenment, but we kind of went too far with it, and we ended up identifying each other under monetary values, so that we've all become part of this monetary system. And abstraction is a way around that, because it's not identifiable, so you don't know quite what you're looking at. So this is part of the problem with Dawkins. And we're looking at sci-fi, and we're looking at allegory. I don't get it, because you're not supposed to get it. It's supposed to be beyond identification, and he is both in a capitalist society and a scientist. So this kind of proves Adorno's point that Kafka is part of this group of artists and writers and musicians that are abstract. They make dissonant art, and therefore are beyond identification, and therefore can maybe show us a glimpse of a reality beyond capitalism, or rather expose the kind of fallacies or the kind of shortcomings of capitalism. So later in the book, you see the sister of Gregor Samsa, or Grete, I think her name is, trying to help him. She kind of sees that he's kind of part insect, so she tries to kind of arrange things, his room and stuff, around him being part insect. But his mum, on the other hand, kind of wants to, hope that he may become human again. So sort of when they're rearranging the room, says, we should leave this on the wall, for example, or leave certain things how they were, in case he returns to being human. Whereas the dad, at one point, when Gregor kind of comes out of his room a little further, or comes out of his room and makes him uncomfortable, because he's kind of come into the house in a way that he hasn't done before. I think there's a whole kind of scenario there, but it was a bit more in depth. But the dad comes home, sees Gregor slightly out of his room, looks at the mother, or I think it is, and thinks that Gregor's attacked the mum when he hasn't. So attacks him with a broom, I think, or a stick of some kind. Something you would attack a beetle with, or a bug with. Basically, in doing this, demonstrates that the father has gone the other direction, that he's decided that Gregor is just an animal or an insect. So you have this kind of like different levels of relating to humanity, maybe the inability to see people as human who are no longer like yourself. So this relates to identity thinking as well, and how we identify things so much we end up categorizing some people as being non-human. So that's also an interesting aspect. And the other thing I would say is just the whole way that the only way to have an adventure today is to have one within capitalism. So again, you wake up, you've transformed into a bug. You don't go, hey, I'm a bug, I'm going to see if I can fly, I'm going to go around the world. I think he was kind of quite sizable bug, obviously, having transformed from a human to a bug. I can go and get bad guys and fly and pick them up, and maybe I can go and take Trump and dip him in a volcano, whatever, stuff one might decide to do if they were a giant bug. Because if you're going to do something, if you're going to be transformed into something that is unreal, it's all a fantasy, why wouldn't you do something fantastical? But he doesn't, because this is the reality we're in. There is no alternative. But then the alternative comes through storytelling, through art, where you present reality very close to fantasy in this dissonant way. So it's kind of jarring, and one kind of starts to feel there's a way out. I can't quite see what it is, but maybe there is something's going to break if we continue with this kind of dissonance. So that's why I think the story is valuable. It has all kinds of aspects. There's such a depth there to how one can think about it. Just using Adorno, for example, that Dawkins should be ashamed as a scientist, because basically, all this stuff that I'm saying is from the human brain. He's a scientist of genes, of human biology. He shouldn't just say this is bullshit because I don't get it. He should be looking at, well, okay, humans come up with these kind of stories. What part of the brain is responsible for that? It's not that they don't exist, the stories. They totally exist, because the human brain is capable of making these stories. So I think, that whole thing is kind of diabolical, shambolic, and it just proves that Dawkins has kind of lost it, that he did something very good in the 70s. The Selfish Gene's an interesting book, kind of carrying on Darwinism in a way. So it kind of talks about how we're not really privileged as humans, which is quite useful, I think, in terms of democracy, because it's like we're all just genes anyway. We're all made up of genes, and genes are competing for survival as genes. They don't care about the human. So this is good from an ecological point of view, and in some sense it's from a democratic point of view, as long as it's taken in the right spirit and not in a totally nihilistic kind of way, I think. But people don't for decades maybe stay cool. They might kind of lose it. He's become kind of a celebrity. He is kind of an indication of what happens to very famous people in the era of the internet, that they have to be seen to say something. He's probably kind of pleased with himself because his views on Kafka went so far, but they are lame and they point out the limits of his thinking. And I think that science needs to kind of consider art more openly, and rather than discount these things, think about how these things are fundamental to human experience and where they come from in the brain. And certainly some scientists do that, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. But that's all I'm going to say for now. So thanks from me, and I hope you enjoyed.
If you have been enjoying our content, please consider registering your desire with the algorithm by liking and subscribing. This really does help us grow and reach a wider community. If you would like to support our work of documenting and nurturing the rise of post-capitalist desires, become a patron. This allows us to continue research-based memes, podcasts, and videos, as well as up our production value. Patrons receive early views of videos, exclusive content, and more, including physical art and the ability to directly influence our research topics. The building of a better world happens on many fronts. Turn on, tune in, and shape a future collective reality.